She walked into the boardroom with a quiet confidence that came from years of preparation and hard work. The room was bright, the sunlight reflecting off the polished wooden table that stretched across the space like a river of formality. High-backed chairs surrounded it, and at the head of the table sat the CEO, a man known for his charm and sharp business sense. The air felt heavy with expectation, but she didn't let it shake her. She had come here for one purpose: to make sure her company was treated fairly, and she was ready to stand her ground. The CEO stood up as she entered, extending his hand with a practiced smile. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and a presence that demanded attention. Everyone in the room looked at her with polite curiosity. Some were friendly faces from previous meetings. Others were strangers. She could feel their eyes measuring her, trying to predict whether she would be intimidated by the grandeur of the room or the power in front of her. She didn't flinch. She shook the CEO's hand firmly, her gaze steady, letting him know that she was not here to be underestimated. The meeting began with the usual introductions, polite nods and smiles that were almost too practiced to feel genuine. The CEO spoke first, his voice smooth and controlled. He explained the contract, highlighting the benefits and emphasizing the mutual advantages. His words were persuasive, filled with industry jargon and examples that were meant to impress. Many in the room seemed convinced, nodding along as if nothing could go wrong. She listened carefully, not missing a single word, because she knew that every detail mattered. As the CEO laid out the contract, she scanned through the papers in front of her. The first few pages seemed straightforward, offering terms that appeared fair. She smiled politely at some points, asking clarifying questions that anyone in her position would. But her eyes were drawn to a section near the middle of the document. Something about it felt off. It wasn't immediately obvious. It was subtle, buried in legal language that most people might overlook. But she had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that this clause was a trap. She leaned back in her chair for a moment, observing the CEO as he spoke. His charm was undeniable, but she noticed the way he occasionally glanced at the supporting documents, the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes whenever he mentioned terms that seemed to favor his company. She realized that he had crafted the contract carefully, expecting that most people would not scrutinize the details. Most people probably wouldn't notice the clause at all, but she had. Her mind raced as she thought about the implications. If this clause went unchecked, it could create long-term problems, binding her company to unfair obligations and potentially causing financial harm. Despite the tension she felt inside, she maintained a calm exterior. She had faced high-pressure situations before, and she knew that showing fear or hesitation would only weaken her position. She listened to the CEO finish his presentation, nodding at appropriate moments, taking notes and asking questions that demonstrated her engagement without revealing the full extent of her concern. Everyone in the room seemed to relax around her, thinking she was just another professional participating in a routine meeting. Little did they know she was already planning her move. As the discussion continued, the CEO spoke about potential future collaborations, painting an optimistic picture of success and growth. His words were persuasive, but her focus remained on the clause she had identified. She reviewed it again, line by line, ensuring that she understood every nuance. She considered the legal language, the potential loopholes, and the way it could be interpreted in the future. She had prepared for this moment, having studied similar contracts in the past and anticipating possible tactics that executives like him might use. Her mind briefly wandered to her journey that led her here. She had worked tirelessly to reach this level, learning every aspect of her industry, building her skills and developing the confidence to stand up for herself and her company. She remembered the countless late nights, the sacrifices and the moments when doubt had crept in. But she had pushed through, knowing that one day she would face situations like this where her knowledge and courage would be tested. That thought gave her strength. She wasn't just representing herself, she was representing every effort, every lesson learned, and every person who had supported her along the way. The CEO then opened the floor for questions, smiling as if expecting easy compliments and polite inquiries. She took a deep breath, preparing to speak. She knew that the moment to act was near, but she didn't rush. She listened to others ask their questions, some of them routine, some of them designed to impress. She answered politely when addressed, but she saved her most important question for the right moment. Timing was crucial. She had to make sure her intervention would be noticed and taken seriously. She watched the CEO closely, noticing subtle signs of confidence and control. He believed he had the upper hand, that his experience and reputation would carry him through any negotiation. But she was not intimidated by his presence. She had prepared thoroughly, knowing that knowledge and observation were her greatest allies. She understood that power in a room is not just about position or charm. It's also about awareness, insight, and the courage to speak up. Finally, the moment arrived. She cleared her throat slightly, enough to draw attention without being disruptive. All eyes turned to her and she spoke with a calm, firm voice. She asked a clarifying question about the clause she had noticed, framing it in a way that was professional but precise. The CEO paused for a fraction of a second, a small crack in his otherwise confident demeanor. He responded smoothly, attempting to reassure her, but she could sense a hint of unease. Her careful observation had already started to unsettle him. The rest of the boardroom remained attentive, curious about the exchange. Some executives whispered quietly to each other, sensing that something unexpected was happening. She maintained her composure, continuing to ask thoughtful questions and pointing out potential issues without appearing confrontational. Her approach was deliberate, showing respect while also demonstrating that she was not easily swayed by charm or authority. As the conversation progressed, she could see the CEO adjusting his tone slightly, acknowledging her points with measured responses. Her presence and insight were starting to shift the dynamics in the room. She realized that her preparation, her careful attention to detail, and her willingness to speak up were giving her an advantage. The balance of power was no longer one-sided. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she was successfully navigating a challenging situation without compromising her professionalism. Throughout the meeting, she remained focused on her goal, ensuring that her company was protected and that the contract would be fair. She was aware that the CEO's smile and charm were tools meant to disarm, but she did not allow them to distract her. Her mind was clear, analyzing each statement, each gesture, and each implication. She understood that true power in negotiation comes from clarity, preparation, and the courage to act when necessary. By the end of the first part of the meeting, she had established herself as someone who was confident, knowledgeable, and capable. The CEO's initial charm and smooth presentation were no longer enough to dominate the conversation. She had subtly shifted the tone of the room, making it clear that she was a professional who demanded respect and attention. The executives around the table began to see her as a serious presence, someone who could not be underestimated. She left the first part of the meeting with a sense of accomplishment. She had not yet confronted the full challenge of the tricky clause, but she had prepared the ground. Her careful observation, strategic questioning, and calm confidence had already made an impact. She knew that the next steps would be crucial, and she was ready to face them with the same determination and insight that had brought her this far. The stage was set, and the tension in the room hinted at the dramatic turn that was about to unfold. As the CEO continued to explain the contract, she quietly turned her attention back to the clause that had caught her eye. It was subtle, written in legal language designed to confuse anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Most people might skim over it, nodding in agreement with the smooth words that surrounded it. But she knew better. She had learned that the smallest details often carried the biggest consequences. Her eyes scanned the paragraph, reading each line carefully, noting the implications that others in the room had probably missed. She noticed how the clause subtly shifted responsibility and risk in ways that favored the CEO's company. If her company agreed without changes, it could face financial obligations that were not immediately obvious. It was a clever trick hidden in plain sight, disguised by technical language. She frowned slightly, not out of fear, but out of concentration. She had anticipated tricky clauses like this in her preparation, but seeing it in real time brought a mixture of respect for the strategy and determination to counter it. The executives around the table continued to nod and make notes, many of them unaware of the potential danger in that section. Some whispered to each other, impressed with the CEO's explanation, assuming the contract was carefully balanced. She could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, knowing that her sharp eye might be the only thing that protected her company from a future mistake. She thought about how her experience and careful preparation had brought her to this point, ready to make a difference where others might have stayed silent. She considered her options. She could wait, letting the CEO finish his pitch before speaking, or she could act now and draw attention to the clause immediately. Timing would be crucial. Acting too soon could seem confrontational, while waiting too long could allow the CEO to control the narrative. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had prepared for this moment, and she knew that speaking up was not just about defending her company, but also about maintaining her own integrity and professionalism. Her mind replayed similar situations she had faced in the past. In every high-stakes meeting, she had learned that confidence, clarity, and patience were essential. She had seen colleagues falter because they were intimidated or hesitant, and she had promised herself that she would never be that person. This was her chance to prove that knowledge and courage could match or even surpass power and authority. She reviewed the clause in her mind once more, breaking down its language into simple terms so she could explain it clearly when the moment came. She imagined different ways the CEO might respond, preparing her responses in advance, so that she could remain calm and effective no matter what tactics were used against her. While everyone else seemed absorbed in the CEO's presentation, she observed the small details that revealed his true confidence and strategy. He smiled often, projecting ease and charm, but she noticed fleeting expressions, slight hesitations, the quick glance at a supporting document, the subtle tightening of his jaw when discussing obligations. These were tiny cracks that spoke louder than his words. She understood that his confidence was partly a performance designed to keep others off balance, and recognizing this gave her an advantage. Her focus returned to the financial and operational implications of the clause. It could create obligations that might not become evident until months or years later, trapping her company in a situation that would be difficult to escape. She imagined the potential scenarios, weighing the risks carefully. Her responsibility wasn't just to herself, it was to the team she represented, to the clients who depended on her company, and to the reputation she had built through years of dedication. Every thought reinforced her determination to act decisively and professionally. She glanced around the room subtly, noting the body language of the other executives. Some were leaning forward, interested in the CEO's words, while others seemed relaxed, assuming the meeting would proceed without complications. She understood that most of them were accustomed to this type of corporate environment, where charm and reputation often carried more weight than scrutiny. She also realized that her approach needed to be strategic, using careful observation and precise language rather than emotion or confrontation. Her mind traced the path she would take. She would start with a question, one that seemed natural and curious, but that would allow her to highlight the problematic clause without appearing aggressive. She would explain her concern logically, using clear and simple reasoning. She knew that clarity and professionalism were her strongest tools. By demonstrating understanding and insight, she could shift the discussion in a way that forced the CEO to respond honestly and take her point seriously. As the CEO paused to invite questions, she felt the moment approaching. She adjusted her posture slightly, taking care to maintain a calm and engaged demeanor. She made brief eye contact with the CEO, signaling attentiveness and prepared to speak. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear but with focused energy. She had trained for moments like this, and her preparation gave her confidence. The room seemed to quiet slightly as she cleared her throat softly, enough to attract attention. She began with a question about a different, seemingly straightforward part of the contract, allowing her to establish rapport and show engagement. The CEO responded smoothly, providing additional clarification. She nodded and thanked him, then gradually guided the discussion toward the section she had identified. Her voice was calm and clear, ensuring that everyone could understand the significance of the clause. She explained why it might create unintended obligations and how it could affect her company in the long term. Her explanation was simple yet precise, translating the complex legal language into plain terms without losing the seriousness of the issue. The CEO's expression shifted subtly as he realized that she had noticed the clause and understood its implications. His smile remained, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, a brief acknowledgement that he was dealing with someone unusually prepared and capable. The other executives began to pay closer attention, sensing that the conversation had taken an unexpected turn. She continued calmly, reinforcing her points with examples and reasoning that were easy to follow, maintaining professionalism while clearly indicating the risks involved. Some executives whispered to each other quietly, intrigued by her approach. They could see that she was not being confrontational, but her confidence and knowledge were commanding respect. She noticed these subtle reactions and felt a quiet satisfaction. Her preparation, careful observation, and courage were making a tangible difference. The dynamics in the room were changing. The CEO's usual smooth control over the discussion was being challenged, and he had to respond thoughtfully rather than relying on charm alone. She considered potential counterarguments that the CEO might present and prepared to address them without escalating tension. She knew that remaining calm, rational, and professional was essential. By framing her points logically and clearly, she could maintain credibility and influence the discussion constructively. Her approach was not about confrontation. It was about ensuring fairness and transparency in the agreement. She was determined to protect her company while maintaining the highest standards of professionalism. The room's atmosphere shifted gradually. What had started as a routine presentation turned into a careful examination of the contract, with everyone listening more intently. The CEO was adapting to the new dynamic, choosing his words more carefully, aware that his usual tactics were less effective. She observed him closely, noting every small gesture, every change in tone. Her awareness gave her an advantage, allowing her to respond appropriately and guide the discussion toward a fair outcome. Throughout this part of the meeting, she remained focused on her goal. She was determined to ensure that the tricky clause would be addressed, that her company would not be put at a disadvantage, and that the conversation would remain professional and constructive. Her calm confidence and sharp insight were proving effective, subtly shifting the power dynamic in her favor. She had anticipated challenges, and now she was navigating them skillfully, demonstrating that knowledge, preparation, and courage could level the playing field even in the face of authority. By the end of this section of the meeting, she had successfully highlighted the clause without causing conflict. The CEO had acknowledged her points, the executives were attentive, and the discussion had become more balanced. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her careful observation and strategic approach had made a real impact. The stage was set for the next steps, where her courage and clarity would be tested further, and where the outcome of this negotiation would hinge on her ability to remain composed and assertive in the face of subtle corporate pressure. The moment had arrived. She felt a surge of focus as she straightened in her chair, ready to address the clause that had been bothering her from the start. Her fingers lightly tapped her notepad, but her movements were calm and deliberate. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that this was the crucial moment when preparation and courage would have to meet action. Everyone in the room was watching, whether they realized it or not. The CEO continued to speak, unaware that his polished smile and confident demeanor were about to be tested. She leaned forward slightly, projecting her voice in a calm and controlled manner. "Excuse me," she began, drawing the CEO's attention, "but this clause seems problematic. It appears to create an obligation that could be risky for my company." She spoke clearly, without hesitation, and her tone carried confidence rather than accusation. The room fell silent for a brief moment, as if the words themselves had shifted the air. She could see the CEO's smile falter just slightly, like a crack in a mask he had worn effortlessly for years. The executives in the room exchanged glances, sensing the tension rising. She continued, carefully explaining why the clause might be considered a trap. She translated the legal language into simple, understandable terms, highlighting potential consequences and long-term implications. She didn't raise her voice, didn't show frustration. She relied solely on clarity and reason. Every word was chosen to convey understanding and authority, not anger or confrontation. The CEO paused, leaning back slightly as he processed her words. He had been confident that no one in the room would notice the subtleties of that section, and he had certainly not expected the young professional at the table to confront him so directly. For a moment his eyes flickered with surprise, then something else. A hint of respect mixed with calculation. He had encountered strong professionals before, but there was something about her precision and calm courage that was disarming. She maintained eye contact, showing that she was serious and knowledgeable. She pointed out examples of how similar clauses had caused difficulties for other companies in the past, citing general industry experiences without revealing sensitive information. Her examples were concrete yet simple, allowing everyone in the room to understand the gravity of the situation. She noticed that the murmurs among the other executives had stopped. They were listening, fully engaged, realizing that the conversation had moved from a routine presentation to a critical evaluation. The CEO attempted to regain control, offering explanations and reassurances. He described the clause as standard practice, something commonly included in contracts of this type. But she anticipated this response. She nodded politely, acknowledging his explanation, and then gently but firmly redirected the discussion. She asked questions that exposed potential loopholes and consequences, always phrased professionally. Her strategy was deliberate. She was not attacking, but rather illuminating the risks, forcing the CEO to respond thoughtfully. The room was silent except for the sound of pens scratching on paper and the occasional clearing of a throat. Everyone was paying attention to the exchange, recognizing the significance of what was happening. She noticed subtle shifts in body language. Some executives leaned forward, interested in her perspective. Others exchanged quick, impressed glances with colleagues. The CEO, while maintaining composure, was visibly recalibrating his approach, choosing words more carefully. Aware that his usual charm and dominance were no longer sufficient, she felt a surge of determination. Years of preparation, study, and experience had led to this moment. She realized that courage alone was not enough. It had to be combined with insight and tact. She continued, pointing out why the clause could create unintended obligations, and how those obligations might impact her company's operations and finances. She emphasized fairness and transparency, framing her points as mutual interests rather than confrontation. This approach allowed her to remain firm while keeping the conversation professional. The CEO shifted in his seat, a subtle indication that her arguments were having an effect. He attempted to offer additional context, explaining that the clause was meant to protect his company, not to create difficulties for hers. She listened carefully, acknowledging the point without conceding the problem. She responded with logical reasoning, demonstrating that while protection was important, it should not come at the expense of fairness or long-term partnership. Her voice remained steady, her expressions measured, reflecting both confidence and professionalism. Her observations extended beyond the words being spoken. She noticed the slight tension in the CEO's posture, the way his hands rested a little more rigidly on the table. His eyes betrayed a moment of uncertainty, a recognition that he was facing someone who could challenge him intellectually. She also observed the reactions of the executives. Some nodded subtly, others exchanged looks of admiration. Her presence was altering the dynamics of the room, turning what had seemed like a routine meeting into a serious negotiation. She paused briefly to collect her thoughts, giving the CEO a chance to respond fully. This silence was deliberate, allowing her words to resonate and giving him space to acknowledge the points she had raised. She noticed him fidget slightly with the contract, as if reconsidering the implications of her observations. It was clear that her preparation, her attention to detail, and her ability to communicate clearly were having a tangible impact. She continued, reinforcing her points with examples that were relatable and understandable. She spoke about potential scenarios where the clause could be misinterpreted or misapplied, highlighting the risks without exaggerating. She maintained a calm and professional demeanor throughout, ensuring that her tone conveyed seriousness and authority rather than confrontation. Her approach was strategic, aimed at encouraging thoughtful discussion rather than provoking defensiveness. The CEO responded, attempting to clarify the intention behind the clause once more, but she anticipated each explanation and addressed them with reasoned counterpoints. She asked questions that required him to consider the implications more carefully, demonstrating both her understanding and her commitment to fairness. The room remained quiet, the focus entirely on the dialogue between them. Every eye was on her, recognizing that she was guiding the conversation with intelligence and tact. She noticed that the CEO's smile, once confident and effortless, had faded almost entirely. It was replaced by a more measured expression, one that reflected concentration and recalibration. He realized that he was dealing with someone who had anticipated the potential traps and was prepared to challenge them with clarity and professionalism. Her calm confidence was disarming him, showing that authority alone could not dominate a well-prepared and courageous professional. Her mind remained sharp, continuously analyzing the responses and the implications. She was aware that the conversation was delicate and that maintaining professionalism was essential. She avoided emotional reactions, focusing instead on clear logical communication. She reiterated the importance of mutual respect and fairness, framing her points in a way that encouraged the CEO to consider the clause from her perspective. Her approach was subtle yet effective, ensuring that her concerns were understood without escalating tension unnecessarily. As the discussion progressed, she could see that the other executives were paying closer attention. They recognized her insight and professionalism, understanding that she was not merely challenging for the sake of argument, but addressing a serious concern. The CEO, while maintaining composure, began to respond with more thoughtfulness, acknowledging the validity of some of her points. Her careful preparation had created a situation where even a highly experienced executive had to take her seriously. She continued to guide the conversation, reinforcing her points, and ensuring that the implications of the clause were fully understood. She used examples from industry practices, highlighting why the clause could be considered problematic and how it could be improved. Her calm, clear communication style made it easy for everyone in the room to follow her reasoning. The dynamics had shifted completely. What had begun as a presentation dominated by the CEO had now become a dialogue guided by her insight and preparation. By the end of this part of the meeting, she had succeeded in drawing attention to the clause and initiating a serious discussion about its implications. The CEO's initial confidence had been challenged, and he was forced to reconsider his approach. The executives were fully engaged, recognizing the importance of the points she had raised. She had maintained professionalism, clarity, and composure throughout, proving that courage and preparation could effectively confront authority. The stage was set for the next part of the story, where the negotiation would move toward resolution, and her influence would continue to shape the outcome. The conversation in the boardroom had shifted completely. What had started as a smooth presentation by the CEO had transformed into a serious negotiation. The young professional remained calm, her focus unbroken, while the CEO tried to regain control of the situation. He attempted to clarify the clause once more, explaining its purpose and insisting that it was standard practice. But she was prepared for this, having anticipated such responses, and she listened carefully before responding. She acknowledged his explanation politely, showing respect for his experience, but then she carefully laid out why the clause could still create problems. She broke it down into simple, clear terms, highlighting how certain phrases could be interpreted in ways that might disadvantage her company. She remained firm but professional, making it clear that her concern was not personal but about fairness and long-term partnership. Her approach was deliberate, designed to encourage thoughtful discussion rather than provoke conflict. The CEO leaned back slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He was considering her points, realizing that her insight and preparation were forcing him to address potential issues he had hoped would go unnoticed. She could see the subtle shift in his demeanor, the slight tension in his posture, the way he chose words more carefully. She knew that her calm, precise approach was working, giving her leverage without appearing aggressive. The other executives in the room were now fully engaged. They recognized the seriousness of the discussion and the competence of the young professional challenging the CEO. Some nodded subtly, while others made notes, quietly appreciating the clarity and logic she brought to the conversation. Her presence was influencing the entire room, showing that careful observation, preparation, and confidence could shift the balance of power even in high-level corporate settings. She continued to address the clause, providing examples of potential scenarios where its wording could lead to unintended obligations or difficulties. She spoke in simple language, making sure everyone could follow her reasoning. Her focus was on solutions rather than criticism. She suggested specific changes and alternatives that would protect both companies, framing her suggestions as ways to strengthen the agreement rather than undermine it. This approach kept the conversation constructive, encouraging collaboration rather than confrontation. The CEO responded, now more cautiously. He explained how the clause was intended to protect his company's interests and tried to justify its wording. She listened attentively, nodding politely, and then provided counterpoints that highlighted potential risks and complications. She asked questions that required him to think beyond immediate benefits and consider long-term implications. Her calm confidence and careful reasoning made it clear that she was not easily persuaded by charm alone. Throughout the discussion, she remained aware of the reactions of the other executives. Their body language showed growing respect and interest. Some whispered quietly to each other, recognizing the skill and preparation she demonstrated. She noticed these reactions and felt a quiet satisfaction, understanding that her efforts were not only protecting her company, but also earning recognition for her professionalism and insight. The CEO adjusted his strategy, attempting to reframe the discussion. He emphasized potential benefits and argued that the clause was fair and common in the industry. She listened carefully, acknowledging valid points but returning to the areas of concern with reasoned explanations and practical suggestions. Her goal was clear: to ensure that the agreement would be fair, transparent, and sustainable without appearing combative or confrontational. Her approach required patience, focus, and careful wording, all of which she maintained consistently. She proposed specific revisions that would protect her company while respecting the CEO's intentions. She framed them as solutions rather than demands, emphasizing mutual benefit and collaboration. Her suggestions were practical, realistic, and easy to implement, which made them difficult to dismiss. She spoke with clarity and confidence, showing that she had anticipated challenges and had prepared thoughtful, effective responses. The CEO listened closely, occasionally nodding, and began to engage with her suggestions more seriously. He asked clarifying questions, and she provided clear answers, demonstrating her understanding and expertise. The other executives were clearly impressed by her knowledge and composure. The conversation had evolved into a balanced discussion, where both parties considered the implications of the clause carefully, guided by her insight and preparation. As the dialogue continued, the atmosphere in the room became less tense and more collaborative. The CEO recognized that her points were valid and that her approach was professional and reasonable. He began to acknowledge areas where adjustments could improve the contract for both sides. Her careful, respectful handling of the situation had created a space for constructive negotiation, allowing the CEO to respond without losing face while ensuring her concerns were addressed. She continued to provide examples and reasoning, making sure that every aspect of the clause was examined. She emphasized the importance of clarity, fairness, and mutual understanding, highlighting how adjustments could prevent future disputes and strengthen the partnership. Her approach was thoughtful, professional, and persuasive, allowing her to guide the discussion without appearing domineering or confrontational. The CEO began to see the merit in her suggestions and acknowledged that some revisions were necessary. He asked for input from his team, and she provided detailed explanations and practical recommendations. The discussion became a true negotiation, with both sides contributing ideas and considering solutions. Her preparation and insight had shifted the dynamics, transforming a potentially one-sided presentation into a collaborative problem-solving session. Throughout the process, she remained composed, confident, and professional. She avoided confrontation, focusing instead on clear communication, practical solutions, and mutual benefit. Her ability to anticipate objections, respond thoughtfully, and maintain calm under pressure demonstrated her expertise and professionalism. The other executives in the room observed and absorbed the interaction, recognizing the skill and integrity she brought to the negotiation. By the end of this part of the meeting, the contract had been discussed thoroughly, and a path toward revision and agreement had been established. The CEO's initial dominance had been balanced by her insight, preparation, and calm professionalism. The other executives had witnessed a strong, thoughtful approach that emphasized fairness, clarity, and collaboration. She had successfully guided the conversation, ensured that her company's interests were protected, and created a framework for constructive resolution. She felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. Her preparation, attention to detail, and courage had allowed her to navigate a challenging negotiation successfully. The CEO, while initially confident in his approach, had recognized her competence and adjusted his strategy accordingly. The conversation had become balanced, fair, and focused on solutions rather than conflict. She had proven that knowledge, preparation, and professional courage could effectively challenge authority and create positive outcomes. As the meeting moved toward its conclusion, she summarized the key points, emphasizing the importance of clarity and mutual benefit. The CEO agreed to review the suggested revisions, and the executives acknowledged her contributions. The room's atmosphere had shifted from one of tension and uncertainty to one of collaboration and understanding. She had maintained professionalism, clarity, and confidence throughout, Ensuring that the discussion was productive and respectful, she left the meeting with a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. Her careful preparation, strategic approach, and professional demeanor had allowed her to address a challenging situation effectively. The CEO and other executives had recognized her competence and insight, creating a foundation for a fair and collaborative agreement. She knew that her actions had not only protected her company, but also demonstrated the power of preparation, courage, and professionalism in high-stakes negotiations. The next part of the story would reflect on the aftermath, recognition, and long-term consequences of her actions. The meeting was over, and the atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from tension to a quiet sense of accomplishment. She leaned back slightly in her chair, feeling the satisfaction that came from successfully guiding a high-stakes negotiation. The CEO had agreed to review the suggested revisions, acknowledging that her points were valid and needed attention. She knew that the contract would be fairer and more balanced because of her actions. Her focus now was on reflecting quietly on what had just happened and the significance of her role in the meeting. The executives began to gather their papers and laptops, exchanging polite words and nods. Many of them looked at her with newfound respect, recognizing that she had managed a challenging situation with professionalism and insight. Some whispered compliments to each other, impressed by the clarity and courage she had demonstrated. She smiled subtly, acknowledging the quiet recognition, but she didn't let it distract her. She remained calm and professional, understanding that her influence extended beyond this single meeting. Her actions had set a tone of competence, fairness, and courage that would be remembered by everyone in the room. As she packed her materials, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. She thought about the years of preparation, the careful study, the experience she had gained, and the determination that had brought her to this point. She realized that all those late nights and sacrifices had been worth it. Her preparation had allowed her to identify the tricky clause, understand its implications, and address it effectively. Her confidence had enabled her to speak up clearly and calmly, even in the presence of powerful authority. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that she had stayed true to her principles while protecting her company's interests. The CEO approached her briefly, offering a handshake and a word of acknowledgement. His smile was measured now, less confident and more respectful. He recognized that she had not only understood the complexities of the contract, but had also guided the discussion in a way that required careful thought and attention. She accepted the handshake politely, maintaining her composure and professionalism. She knew that this interaction had created mutual respect and had demonstrated the value of preparation, insight, and clear communication. Outside the boardroom, she walked through the office corridor, reflecting on the impact of the meeting. She realized that her actions had influenced not only the outcome of the contract, but also the perception of her abilities among the executives and the CEO. Her careful, professional handling of the situation had shown that knowledge and courage could level the playing field, even when facing experienced and confident authority figures. She understood that her approach had created a lasting impression, one that would continue to shape relationships and decisions in the future. She thought about the importance of preparation and observation in professional settings. She had identified the tricky clause because she had taken the time to read carefully, understand nuances, and anticipate potential risks. Her attention to detail and analytical thinking had allowed her to act decisively when the moment came. She realized that courage alone would not have been enough. It had to be combined with insight, strategy, and clear communication. This lesson reinforced her belief in the value of preparation, diligence, and professionalism. Reflecting on her communication, she noted how critical it had been to remain calm, clear, and focused. She had avoided confrontation, instead guiding the discussion with logic and reasoning. Her ability to translate complex legal language into understandable terms had ensured that everyone in the room could grasp the significance of the clause. By framing her points as solutions rather than accusations, she had created an environment conducive to collaboration and constructive negotiation. This approach had allowed her to protect her company while maintaining respect and professionalism. She also considered the broader impact of her actions. Her colleagues and other executives had witnessed her approach, gaining insight into how knowledge, preparation, and composure could influence high-level negotiations. She realized that her example could inspire others to approach challenging situations with the same combination of clarity, courage, and professionalism. Her actions had not only addressed the immediate issue, but had also contributed to a culture of fairness, attention to detail, and constructive dialogue. As she returned to her office, she reflected on the CEO's reaction. The fading of his initial smile had been a subtle but meaningful acknowledgement of her competence. She recognized that authority and experience do not guarantee dominance when faced with careful observation, preparation, and calm assertiveness. Her ability to maintain professionalism while challenging the status quo had demonstrated that fairness and clarity can prevail even in high-pressure, high-stakes environments. This realization reinforced her confidence and determination for future challenges. She also thought about the long-term implications for her company. By addressing the tricky clause and guiding the negotiation toward fairer terms, she had protected her company from potential risks and obligations. She had ensured that the contract would support sustainable growth and positive relationships, rather than creating hidden challenges. Her actions had safeguarded not only immediate interests, but also the long-term integrity and reputation of her company. This reinforced the importance of vigilance, preparation, and proactive engagement in professional settings. Reflecting on her personal growth, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the immediate success. She had applied her knowledge, experience, and judgment effectively under pressure. She had demonstrated that professionalism, clarity, and courage could influence outcomes positively, even in challenging circumstances. She recognized that these qualities were the foundation of her professional identity and would continue to serve her in future endeavors. This understanding strengthened her resolve to maintain the same approach in all critical situations. As the day ended, she reviewed her notes and reflected on the key lessons from the meeting. Preparation and observation were essential. Knowledge and insight could reveal hidden challenges and risks. Courage and composure were necessary to act decisively and effectively. Clear communication, framed in professional and constructive terms, could influence even the most confident authority figures. Collaboration and solution-focused discussion created positive outcomes while maintaining respect and professionalism. These lessons would guide her in future negotiations, meetings, and decisions. She also reflected on the human aspect of the meeting. The CEO, while initially confident and charming, had responded thoughtfully when presented with clear, reasoned points. The other executives had shown respect and recognition for her preparation and professionalism. She understood that successful negotiations depend not only on knowledge and courage, but also on empathy, clarity, and the ability to guide discussions in constructive ways. These human-centered qualities were as important as analytical skills and strategic thinking. In the following days, she received feedback from colleagues and supervisors, praising her approach and the results of the negotiation. Her ability to identify the tricky clause, address it effectively, and guide the discussion toward fair and practical solutions had been widely recognized. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that her preparation, insight, and professionalism had not only protected her company, but had also earned the respect and admiration of her peers. This recognition reinforced her confidence and validated her approach to high-stakes professional situations. She also reflected on the personal satisfaction that came from doing the right thing. By speaking up and addressing the issue, she had upheld her principles and demonstrated integrity. She had navigated a challenging situation with professionalism, respect, and clear communication, ensuring that fairness and transparency were maintained. This personal satisfaction was as meaningful as any external recognition, reinforcing her commitment to approach future challenges with the same dedication, courage, and insight. Looking ahead, she understood that this experience would shape her approach to negotiations and professional challenges in the future. She had proven that careful observation, preparation, courage, and clear communication could influence outcomes positively. She had learned the value of combining analytical skills with human-centered professionalism, empathy, and tact. These lessons would continue to guide her in protecting her company's interests, building positive relationships, and navigating complex situations with confidence and integrity. As the story concluded, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced a challenging situation, identified a hidden risk, and addressed it effectively. She had guided a high-stakes negotiation with professionalism, clarity, and courage, earning recognition and respect from her peers and superiors. Her actions had protected her company, demonstrated her competence, and reinforced the importance of preparation, insight, and human-centered professionalism. She knew that the lessons learned from this experience would serve her well in all future endeavors, shaping her approach to challenges, negotiations, and professional growth.